Hi, welcome to this evening's Law Awareness webinar on freelancing in a crisis. This is jointly organized by the Law Society Pro Bono Services Office and the National Trade Union Congress, NTUC. My name is Lian Cheng. I'm a lawyer. I used to be a freelancer in the arts industry as well. But before we begin, there are some housekeeping matters that I have to highlight to you. One, there are some relevant handouts that have been uploaded and you can download them on the right-hand side of your screen. If you're using a mobile phone or tablet, it's at the top right-hand corner. If you're using a computer, you should see the icons in the panel on your right. Please do download these useful materials. They will only be available during the time of the webinar. During this webinar, please feel free to ask any questions as well. You can type them into the questionnaire and your questions will only be seen by the organizers, but we will try our best to answer your questions during the talk or at the end of the talk. Please note that this discussion and the materials provided during this webinar is not intended to substitute any form of legal advice. Of course, circumstances vary. If you need specific legal advice, please consult your own lawyer. And with that, I think we can begin the seminar for today. With the recent COVID-19 situation, I've heard of significant disruptions to the lives of freelancers. Some of them face a significant loss of income. Some of them had their fees cancelled, had their contracts cancelled as well. And this webinar was designed with the idea that we can provide some information to help support you and see what are the available remedies during this period through be it the resilience budget or the recent COVID-19 Temporary Measures Act introduction. We'll also be discussing what the rights are for you in situations like this. And with us today, I have two very distinguished guests, Mr. Patrick Tay and Mr. Francis Goh. Patrick is the Member of Parliament, West Coast GRC and the GPC Chairman, and the Assistant Secretary General of NTUC. Francis is the Head of International Arbitration and Head of Private Client Advisory Practice at Eversheds Harry Elias. Patrick is also a mediator at the Singapore Mediation Centre and the Singapore International Mediation Centre. Patrick and Francis, welcome.
Hi.
Hello. Hi.
Hi.
Good to be here.
Thank you for joining us
Good
today.
evening, everyone.
Good evening. So today we have an hour. Let's go into the slides. Can I have the next slide? Okay, we are talking about assistance for freelancers today. Maybe Francis, would you like to help set the stage for us? Who is or what is the freelancer?
Okay, thanks. Well, if you are operating your own business or trade, the likelihood is you are a freelancer. A freelancer is anyone who is self-employed. You are the entrepreneurial mindset person who has decided not to work in a company for lifetime employment. You've decided that you wanted to work on projects, you want to choose who you want to work with, you want to have flexi time, you want to have flexi arrangements. So that more or less describes you as a freelancer. But you know what? Being a self-employed person, I've heard many freelancers tell me that they feel all alone. Well, you are not alone. In 2015, there was a labor report that put the number of self-employed persons at 11.3% of our workforce. Where in 2020 now, I think the numbers are only, much bigger. So get this in your head. You are a business owner. You are running your own business. You need to know how to do things and to stand up for yourself. So with that, I think, we can have a good discussion.
Yes, and actually, there are really many freelancers out there. Even during my days in the arts industry, the technicians, the crews, they are all freelancers. In the recent talks that I've been giving at the National Arts Council and attending, there are also a lot of freelancers in the what they call the MADE industries, the design and industries. But of course, there are also a lot of assistance available for freelancers in this period. and one of the big piece of budget that has come out is the resilience budget. Can I have the next slide? And Patrick, maybe you'll be in a position to help share more with us on this resilience budget as well as the self-employed person's income relief scheme, SIRS.
Yeah, maybe just to share in context, I think Francis is absolutely correct. I think there are a number of freelancers. MOM uses this term called own account workers in the labor market report. But if you're looking at it, there are a whole host of nomenclature used. You describe them. You call them freelancers, you call them self-employed, gig workers, contingent workers, informal workers. So there's been various terms coined. But of course, labor market report says own account workers. But if you look at this group where it's usually in what we call in legal terms contract for service arrangements, there are something like about 200,000 of them in Singapore. This so-called freelance self-employed workers. So not a very, very sizable group. And if you look at this year's budget, we had 3 rounds of it in the last 3 months. Very unfortunate. It's unprecedented in many ways. And but one thing I'm glad to see is that even for the onset, the very first budget, there's a lot of focus this round on supporting freelancers. Well, in the budget, they call them supporting the self-employed, the SEPs, self-employed persons. So I think looking at the budget and the various committee of supply debates, etc. They've used this term SEPs as the generic word to describe freelance and self-employed professionals. So there's frankly, for the very first time, we see a lot of resources put in all 3 rounds of budget to help the freelance and self-employed. I think the government recognizes that this is a big group of people, 200,000 of them in various sectors. You have insurance, property, what Liang Chen mentioned, creative media and the arts. You have also private hire drivers, taxi drivers. So a very very, very diverse trades. And in particular during this period where we have 2 months of circuit breaker and the whole host of uncertainties are happening, and the way the economy probably after 1st of June is going to open up, I think that there are a lot of fears and anxieties. In fact, many of the freelancers I spoke to, in fact, this afternoon I was just on a conversation in some of the social enterprises which engages quite a lot of freelancers. I think the big challenge is how do we tide through this period? Yes, there are those that have managed to pivot and of course adapt and went on virtual e-delivery of services. But for those who in more ways than one are unable to do it, there have been a whole host of measures announced. Of course, the key thing is to make sure that they're able to survive. So lives and livelihoods are very important. So there are a few schemes that have come up. So nationally, there are 2 major schemes that have come up for the very first time, really unprecedented. Firstly, of course, the self-employed income relief scheme, SIRS for short. We will, I think it's in the handouts they are going to be provided. There are quite a bit of information there. So you can actually go to the SIRS eligibility checker. There's an online platform, either through your mobile or other devices. You can check whether you're eligible for this income relief. And mind you, it's not a small sum of money. It's about $1,000 for a 9-month period. So if you qualify for it, please do apply for it. You can apply for it online. And actually the bulk of those that are on self-employed arrangements would have auto-qualified for this. So that's why we suggest you use the online platform to check your eligibility. If you're auto-qualified, you actually don't need to apply. You will probably get a letter within the next 2 weeks to notify that you actually are entitled to the self-employed income relief scheme. So that's one aspect of it. Yeah. So the other part where the budget focused quite a lot on the freelance and self-employed is in the area of training. Because I think in this period where there's a lot of downtime, there's strong support for training. We've also included infographic on that for you to digest. And this training comes with it, not just picking up new skills, but at the same time also training allowance for you to sort of like have a daily stipend as you go for your training. And above all these measures, there are of course those that are generically provided, broad-based across the entire Singapore. because we bear in mind that employees, you had the COVID support grant, those who have an employment relationship have the COVID support grant as well as the job support scheme. For freelance and self-employed, we have the SIRS for short to help each and every one of you navigate and fight through this difficult period. So these are the two main areas. We can talk a bit more about the others after this.
Yes. So the important thing is the information relating to those two major schemes that Patrick has spoken about are available for download as a handout for today's webinar. So please, if you haven't accessed those funds already, please do have a look at it, see whether they apply to you, and then whether you can register for them. Patrick, I have a cheeky question. I hear that the registration for the self-employed person for the SIRS scheme opened about 2 weeks ago, and perhaps there was some. Are there any things you would like to highlight for our self-employed persons in terms of making the application?
Yes.
No.
So just bear in mind. I know we are doing this for the very first time, and of course there are 200,000 freelance and self-employed, and I think many, in fact more than half, may well qualify for this, and therefore we have actually come up with the online system, and I must admit that in the first week the online system was really overwhelmed because it tries to make it as how I put it, as friendly as possible. So you try to grab data from various sources like SingPass data, etc. So there's a lot of integration with many other agencies because we require CPF data, etc. And to make sure that we do the due diligence. So otherwise, but just the few key points are: firstly, most of our freelance and self-employed would be automatically eligible. So wait for a letter that's going to come to you within the next 2 weeks by end of the month. If you don't get it, then drop an email to that line that's in the infographic provided, and those who fill in the eligibility, because there's an online eligibility checker. We also notice a lot of the bottlenecks are because many of them either don't have some documents or don't fulfill all the criteria. So that's where the hiccups and the search of our hotlines and our emails we're getting a lot of queries to people who just missed by a margin or by the skin of the teeth because of some income requirements and some documentation. So bear with us. I think if apply it online, I think the last check, because I was also helping out yesterday, the last check is things are going fine. So if you qualify and you fill the criteria during the checker, you should be able to apply online relatively easily. If not, the website, the web address, and the emails are available for you to send in. I have a big army of colleagues. I repeat again, a big army of colleagues virtually helping to answer all these calls and be patient with us.
I have a question from one of the attendees. Do you know when the relief will be coming in for the freelancers if they qualify?
Yes. So if they auto qualify, there will be a letter coming to them by end of the month. So by next month, there is some timelines we've announced them. So it's all available information on the net.
Okay, great. I hear of the training fund and the NTUC care fund as well. That's on the slide now.
Yes. So thanks for the slide, Yanshan, and of course, me being from NTUC and the Labour Movement, we have actually done over and above as usual, besides the income relief scheme and what we have done nationally to help freelance and self-employed professionals to go for training. We internally in the Labour Movement, as in all the various downturns, as well as in the course of the many years, we have always done a few add-ons for our NTUC union members. So if you're a union member and if you are freelance and self-employed, even if you're not a member, you can still join, and you'll find some way to help you have access to these two pieces of fund. It's called the NTUC Care Fund for COVID-19. It's a once-off lump sum over and above whatever that you're going to receive through SIRS. So this is over and above, I repeat again. And the NTUC Training Fund, which tops up in addition to what the government already provides as a baseline. So if you're an NTUC union member, please, I've PBSO has kindly put up the infographics available on screen for you to download them. They are also available on all our various web platforms, and of course, easily you can Google them. So all these three, if you know the titles, you just search for them, and everything should be quite seamlessly obtainable virtually.
So just to clarify, the NTUC training fund, you don't need to be an NTUC member in order to qualify, right?
Yes, there are, as I said earlier, there's a training fund for freelance and self-employed, generally for all freelance and self-employed. But the NTUC training fund tops up this, so you get an additional funding because without going to the details, we have actually what we call a UTAP fund, a Union Training Assistance Fund, which we help to provide further subvention over and above government funding. And of course, we also top up the training allowance as well. Just a special kind of privilege for our NTUC union members.
I have one question about the SIRS program, which is the attendee is asking. He was partly employed for the period from January to October, and then thereafter became a freelancer from October onwards last year. Would he still qualify for the SIRS program?
Yeah. But my suggestion is for him to go to the online eligibility checker as a baseline to key in all the parameters, because actually without going through the list, if you see the handout, there are more than 10 of the 15 variables. But if, like I said again, if he or she misses one of the criteria, we actually have an appeals framework. That's why we have left the mailbox, email address, sirs@ntuc.org.sg for any of our freelance and self-employed colleagues who want to make an appeal if they happen to miss one of the criteria. Could be a situation like that that you have just shared. So I think based on whatever brief information I have from that question, I think he may have just missed one of the criteria. So he or she needs to apply for that.
Understand. And of course, I think some of the other employee, the criteria also include, for example, your spouse's income, etc. as well.
Net trade income and spouse's income. So we also, I said this is a government funding, and then we need to do the necessary due diligence. So therefore, unfortunately, we still need to do a bit of the documentation as well as getting supporting documents, because after all this is over, there will be, I'm very sure there will be some audit trail going around. So therefore we are trying our best, but again we are giving a bit of a latitude to really consider real hardship cases. The national framework is that there are two streams: one for those in an employment relationship and those in a self-employed arrangement. So you can't have the best of both worlds. So if you qualify for one, you will not qualify for the other, like vice versa.
Okay, I see quite a few questions about how to apply for the funds and the SIRS program, etc. I don't think we would spend some time talking about
in the slide. Yeah, you can just look at the slide. Yeah.
Yes, I think the handout. So if I may help the webinar attendees, there are five handouts in the panel. You can download them. 3 of them relates to the NTUC training funds, the UCAF fund, as well as the SIRS program. So if you have any questions, there are also relevant links up there. Download it, have a look at it. You will know the steps to apply for these funds and whether you
and you will answer all the application and appeals questions.
Okay, then I move on to the next part. Actually, we know briefly the schemes that are available out there to help the freelancers. I know of another piece of legislation that just got passed that has quite some impact on my freelancer friends, and I think Patrick can help, and perhaps Francis can help us answer or explain some concepts behind this new act that has just been passed in April of this year.
Okay, great. Well, it's got this interesting name called COVID-19 Temporary Measures Act. Patrick used the word earlier, unprecedented. I think another adjective that comes to mind is that this is totally unforeseen. Many people, and in fact, the whole world has been caught off guard. A lot of their contractual arrangements and relationships have been rendered difficult or nearly impossible to perform. And the most interesting part is that I think many persons do not have their contract terms actually provide for a scale of disruption of this kind. So that's why, in an unprecedented move again, our legislature has passed this act. So what's it about? It's about applying a 6-month moratorium, in a sense, to give temporary reprieve for parties to relook their relationships, withhold legal action, so that basically people can take stock, take a breather, and see how to get through this. Look at it this way. It's very nice and fun for us lawyers to be debating whether, pandemic includes COVID, whether it's unforeseen, and what's the effect this is going to have. But when the reality is that it's affecting livelihood and people's future, and then it's not about rights, it's not about obligations. It's really about how can we do the right thing, what is just, what is fair, and how can we help one another get through this. So this is what the act does. In the next slide, I will summarize the various steps that need to be taken. Right. So first of all, understand that contracts that are made before 25th March are likely to qualify for this relief. And your obligation is to be performed after 1st February. All right, which means from the time the onset of COVID and into the current period that we are in. So some people may be saying, why is there this restriction? Think of it this way: anyone who's signing a contract today who has not taken into account the COVID situation is, well, asking for it. All right. But those who were contracting before COVID hit us, that is where this would be an unexpected, unforeseen, unprecedented event. And those are the people that the legislation is targeting. So check your eligibility. The website is there. The next thing is relief. What kind of relief can you expect? Now, this act doesn't rewrite your contract, neither does it cancel your contract. It just operates as a 6-month reprieve where parties are not allowed to sue one another, bring insolvency proceedings, enforce securities that they may have. And it relates to specific categories of contract. For example, bank loans towards SMEs, construction and supply contracts, certain leases, commercial leases, certain commercial supply contracts, and something that may hit a lot of freelancers are the events and tourism type of contracts. So for these, basically, having checked out the relief, you then try to reach out to the other party to see if you all can work out a suitable arrangement. This act encourages parties to negotiate with one another to see whether they can reach a fair commercial compromise. The idea is about helping one another get through this period. However, MinLaw has also set up a panel of assessors. This is to help those parties who can't reach an agreement. Then there is a very quick and summary process. No lawyers are involved to represent parties in this process, but parties are encouraged to write in and apply for an assessor to review your situation. There is a process, but long and short of it is once your papers are all put in and the details of who to contact are there, an assessor is obliged to render his decision within 5 days. And this decision by an assessor is non-appealable, but it can be enforced like as if it's a court order. So essentially, this is a way that helps parties circumvent any shortcomings of their contract, also helps parties who have difficulty negotiating with the other party for a compromise, and it provides you with a cost and time efficient way to actually resolve any disputes through the panel of assessors. So that in summary, what's the act trying to do, and it's there for you. So please reach out and make use of this resource.
Mm. So in summary, actually, this act just sort of like places a pause on your contracts. Am I right to say that?
Yes, the reason is because for example, if you had a contract where you're supposed to deliver a certain product within the circuit breaker period, but you're not allowed to meet, you're not allowed to go out, clearly there's going to be a disruption. And if your other party is then insisting, that you should have performed it, you failed to perform in time, I'm going to cancel the contract, I'm going to enforce the cancellation fee, and I'm going to, it all sounds really unfair, and if you're going to have
Mm.
to go to court, it's just going to add to the greater problem. So this act cuts to the chase. It says if your contract is a type within the scheduled contract has been affected, then apply for the relief, try to negotiate an agreement, if not, go for an assessment.
Hmm. Actually, I think this pause seems to be quite a good actually remedy or reminder for the parties to the contract to perhaps talk and discuss a lot more, because really, like as the speakers have mentioned, this COVID-19 situation is unprecedented actually.
Mm,
Everyone's affected by it, and really I think the 6-month pause will give a lot of time for some people to talk and then renegotiate and see how things can be done moving
mm,
forward. Yeah, and it gives us a more practical solution to the
yeah.
problems we face. Yeah. Um, I am going to move on to the next slide. I was asked a lot of questions when the whole COVID-19 situation happened. One of the most popular questions I get is the concept of force majeure. And I think it can be quite daunting for some of the freelancers because they sometimes see in their contracts, but they don't exactly know what it means. And then now
Mm,
with COVID-19 happening, people are triggering it or relying on it to insist on certain things.
mm.
Maybe Francis, can you try to let the attendees know what we mean by force majeure?
Okay, let me jump right in. Okay, in this slide, what we're going to try to do is to give you some quick and easy definitions, okay? So
Mm,
that people can't, pull wool over your eyes by throwing these terms around. Okay, the broad understanding here is that all of these are legal excuses which parties may try to use to avoid performing their contract. The first one, force majeure, requires you to have a specific clause in your contract covering the event that is interfering with the performance of the contract. So you, for example, if your force majeure is being invoked, would have to find in your contract a written term that says, in the event of a flood and there is a delay, the contract can be delayed with no fault of either party. So
mm,
it requires a contract clause and a specific event. As I mentioned earlier, the COVID-19 Temporary Measures Act was passed because most people would not have had a clause that
mm,
says, in the event of a COVID-19 or a global pandemic which interferes with our contract, we can suspend or cancel our contract. Okay, so lawyers will have a field day once circuit breaker is lifted, arguing over whether the contract falls within a force majeure, but that's a story for another day.
mm,
Frustration. Where there is no specific contract clause, there is a general doctrine in common law countries that says where an unexpected event subsequently happens that makes performance of your contract impossible, then you are justified in having your contract obligations cancelled. Then, of course, typically what people talk about in layman terms is they call it suspending a contract. Something has happened, so let's suspend the contract. It's not really a legal term, but it basically means that the party talking about this is hoping that the other side will agree that they can either stop performance, delay performance, cancel performance, or maybe change the performance. So I think that's the important thing to bear in mind when you are talking about these different types of terms.
Mm. Okay, I have a scenario which I'm going to pose to the two speakers. This was a question that was posed to me. Of course, names have been changed to protect the innocent. But here's the scenario. So a party was supposed to deliver some items that was contracted for, but because of COVID-19 circuit breaker measures, he's unable to do so, like what Francis mentioned just now in one of his examples. Is there a force majeure? Can he suspend the contract? What would you recommend that he do in such a situation? Maybe
Right.
we
Let me
start with
jump in
Francis
first, and then I will let Patrick share with us some of his war stories. Okay. The first question here would be, does the contract have a clause that expressly
Mm,
deals with force majeure? All right. Does it deal with the COVID-19 circuit breaker situation? And chances are they won't have a contract term of this kind. So the next inquiry that you would then go is force majeure. If that doesn't work, can we do frustration? So the question then would be, is performance impossible as a result of this COVID-19 situation? Again, that's going to be a question of fact and circumstance. And then we
mm,
talk about suspending the contract. That's a conversation that I would encourage all of you to have with your other party to see whether you can work out through the differences and see if an event can be postponed, if a delivery can be delayed. Work something out that works for you, because whether it's through mediation, whether it's through assessment, whatever you call it, if you can find a solution to help each other through, that's going to be the more meaningful solution. Patrick, over to you.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I agree from all legal points of view, but I mean, practically on the ground, I've been seeing many, I mean, name it social
Mm,
enterprises, sole proprietorships, and a lot of freelancers who provide their services for a variety of things. I mean, if you look at tourist guides, for example, they are often on contract for service. You have also sports coaches, you have instructors, you have event companies, and many of them hire a lot of freelancers. So
mm,
so definitely during this period, there are a lot of challenges which a lot of our freelancers face. So I think that a few practical things to look out for. Of course, we have the legal recourse, but I think from a practical point of view, we also want our freelancers and of course our small business owners to really look out from a long-term point of view, because your
mm,
clients or your customers, so to speak, will not just disappear overnight. I think they will be there, and I think that's what Francis alluded to: mediating, negotiating. I've started to see quite a lot of freelancers starting to negotiate with the buyers of their services to come up with a amenable and amicable arrangement.
mm,
Of course, the public sector, i.e., the government, is also putting money where the mouth is. As you heard yesterday, in terms of sports coaches, Ministry of Education had decided to allow them to get a portion of their fees in advance. Bearing in mind that because of the circuit breaker measures and home-based learning, and of course a reduction of co-curricular activities, and
mm,
so many of these coaches and instructors are being affected. So I think the public sector is leading the way, and of course, public sector also is I wouldn't say culprit, but one big customer or buyer of services which have also postponed many major events across ministries, stat boards. I mean, I've been invited late last year and early part of this year to quite a number of mega events celebrating major things this year, but they have all in more ways than one. In fact, I would dare say all are being cancelled. almost
Mm.
cancelled or postponed to maybe perhaps maybe 2021. So I think
Mm.
very important for freelancers to look out for this and build use this time to build a relationship with your clients. And of course, as what Francis alluded to, there are various measures. I mean, we hope not to get to a very contentious kind of situation. Of course, we have the various alternative dispute resolution measures, such as voluntary mediation, and of course the various mediation and alternative dispute channels, which many of us, actually the practitioners, are very well aware of, and therefore, I mean, we try to avoid the litigation route. And of course, for freelancers, there's an additional channel. If you really do face issues, it's where the small claims tribunal will come in to help to provide, I mean, a slightly more economical kind of access, of course, with a limit to the claims. And likewise, also for freelancers, if you do face any issues, the Tripartite Alliance for Disputes Management actually has started since April last year to hear out on a voluntary basis, i.e., both parties have to consent and volunteer to go into mediation to resolve some of these non-payment issues.
Okay. Thank you, Patrick. Actually, we will be talking about some of the remedies available at the later part of our webinar. I actually had some observations during this COVID-19 situation. Is that actually some of the freelancers or even some of the theatre companies that I'm familiar with, they've gone into quite creative ways to resolve the contractual disputes. For example, offering credits, instead of when the school has paid to for tickets to go to a public performance, but because it can't be done now, whether that can be converted into an online session for the students in class. So actually, there are quite some interesting ways that I've observed in the recent period as well.
Yes, you're right, Liang Shen. Yeah, I've seen quite a few. For example, like I don't know whether it's a good example, but the tuition or enrichment industry, where there are a lot of the freelancers. I think they have also gone online to deliver tuition or enrichment programs via the web. And lo and behold, I think with many parents and students getting used to this whole virtual home-based learning environment, I think it's starting to sink in that it may well be a better option, having to save time from commuting and time savings in more ways than one, and in the comfort of your home.
Yeah.
And I've seen fitness freelancers go online as well, offering classes, and I think that's great.
Gaining a lot of eyeballs and popularity globally, because when they put them on Facebook Live or Insta Live or whatever platforms, it's a global audience. So I think, well, I see that's a bit of a silver lining to it.
I'm going to move on to the next slide, which is about IP rights. Intellectual property rights. It's also another popular question that came came to me a lot during this period of time as well. They were many freelancers asked me, for example, if my contract provides for tranche payments, where I'm to deliver a product after the last tranche of payment, but the last tranche of payment didn't come. What will happen to my intellectual property? What can I do with this product that I have available? What would you recommend or advise, Francis?
Okay, intellectual property rights. This is a really big issue, but let me try to give you 3 anchors. Okay, intellectual property rights, freelancers, that is your product and your bargaining tool. You need to build it into your pricing mechanism, and your delivery should be contingent upon payment. So to your point, Dangshan, if this freelancer has gone and done the product, handed over, and then is waiting for payment in 3 tranches, I think the freelancer has put himself in a very disadvantageous position, because he's given off the product. Likely he doesn't have a written contract that deals with the retention of his intellectual property, all right, and he's waiting for payment. So as you negotiate your contract, one way is to say that you've given a draft, you get a tranche of payment, you will only deliver the final or finished product in exchange for the payment. Okay, so it's your bargaining chip. You should use it to leverage off for payment. First idea. Second idea would be this: it is your right. So can you then use this in your portfolio? Can you use this and tell people that you've done this kind of a product? All right. If you want that, you should build it into your contract. Have this discussion at the time of engagement with the other party and say, you know what? I'm going to hand you the product, but I want to have this right to use it in my portfolio. I want to have the right to be able to tell others that I've done this kind of work for you. And could you give me a reference? So if you have had the discussion and it's built into your contract, that is something that you can use. Now, the other aspect here is this, and it's something which most freelancers don't think about: licensing. All right.
Mm,
They can actually keep the product and allow the other party that they've done the work for to use it for a fee. And that provides you with an additional income stream. All right.
mm,
But now here's the thing: a lot of the freelancers that I speak to don't see themselves as having a meaningful product. They see themselves as having the weaker bargaining position. So a lot of intellectual property rights are not even brought up because they're afraid that they can't get the job. But I think freelancers, the world's changing. We'll talk more about the tripartite standards later. The perception of the employing party is also changing. I
mm,
think it's time that you see yourself as a business owner and, claim your rightful place.
mm.
And
Well,
of course, just to augment what Francis just shared, I think the Copyright Act is due for amendments. I mean, it
Yeah.
was supposed to be this year, but I don't know how the legislative calendar will look like. But we also have through our various legal primers and of course through Law Society Pro Bono Services Office and the various engagement platforms with the freelance and self-employed have always gotten this question on, how to better look after my IP rights. So I think
mm,
that's one key development that will likely be happening with the impending changes to the Copyright Act. And I'm
Mm,
looking forward to that too. Yeah.
yeah.
mm. Okay. I will move on to the next slide. Just now, Francis and Patrick had given some alluding to it already in terms of what remedies the freelancers can have in the event of a dispute with their customer or client. We
Mm.
talked about mediation. We talked a little bit about the TADM, the Tripartite Alliance Dispute Management. Any other avenues for dispute resolution?
Well, let me just jump in so that this slide that's here for our listeners and participants provides you with a kind of roadmap. Okay, if you're having a contractual dispute or a problem, typically people would say, I'll see you in court or I'll sue you. So in the court, we have different levels. There's a small claim tribunal, which handles certain types of claims up to about 20,000. Then you've got the magistrates courts, which handles up to about 60 over 1,000. The district courts, which would have a jurisdictional level of up to about 250,000. Then we have the High Court. Technically, the High Court can hear all types of claims, irrespective of amount. But typically, most people, because of the other courts that are available, would use the High Court for larger claims in excess of 250,000. But in a situation like COVID, we know that the courts are, not as able to provide you with the responsive remedy that you need. So there's been arbitration. Arbitration is basically private judges. People select their own arbitrator, and based on certain types of rules, they fight it out. Arbitration was intended to be quick and timely and efficient, but it's grown now to mirror the courts. So that's where we look at mediation and the tripartite dispute management, TADM as they call it, mediation through the SIMC, Singapore International Mediation Center, or Singapore Mediation Center. Now, these are where a third party that you nominate by agreement with the other party helps you negotiate, facilitate your discussion so that you can come to a creative solution. The tripartite solutions, as well as these mediation solutions, augment your negotiation. And you should really look at that, especially in a COVID-19 situation. It's pointless to be fighting over rights. It's more important to be looking at how creative solutions can be reached and how you can mend the relationships so that when COVID's over and businesses are open again, you can emerge stronger together. There is, of course, other support, through helplines, through the Law Society pro bono services. Familiarize yourself with these other support measures. Uh, Patrick and I were just talking about this. We want the message to go out to freelancers that you never walk alone. You should never feel
Yeah.
discouraged or pigeonholed into a corner. There's always a way out.
Yeah, I think, well, in a way, it's other support measures. So we were just chatting earlier, including in many of our previous legal primers, that it's very important to band together. The labor movement has been actively been doing this in the last, I would say, last 5 years, trying to bring together freelancers and the self-employed across various sectors and industries. Earlier on, I alluded to some of them: the National Private Hire Vehicles Association, the National Instructors and Coaches Association. Of course, the Taxi Association has always been there. And of course, the various groups that we realize that unity is strength. Although the freelance and self-employed sector is very diverse, very big, and very huge, different crafts, different trades, different kinds of services provided. But I think important for everyone to, particularly during this difficult period of time and potentially a downturn in looming, is to band together to be able to overcome some of these. Just like the announcement yesterday by Ministry of Education to help the coaches, it was because of the efforts of NICA, which is the National Instructors and Coaches Association, which is supported by the labor movement, trying to feedback what are the challenges faced by freelancers in those particular segments. So I think he has shown, through the years that those that have come together are able to right some of these exigencies or unique or unprecedented situations and crises better. So I think something, I mean, of course, we can't form things overnight. It requires everyone to come together. But I say that's one major takeaway for all of us, particularly in this freelance and self-employed space. And it's just like the Private Hire Vehicle Association. I think some of the feedback, like, for example, stopping ERP during circuit breaker months, were actually feedback from the Private Hire Vehicle Association as well as the Taxi Association, and including the changes to the Copyright Act that's impending. I remember vividly the Singapore Professional Photographers Association coming together and engaging IPOS and MinLaw in this journey. So I think I've seen through the years that if you band together and do look out for each other, I think unity is strength for sure.
Yeah, actually, that's very useful to know that we are all not alone for the freelancers. I have one final slide about contract issues, which is of course what we would call the perfect contract. Francis, maybe if you can give us in summary, what should freelancers be looking out for in order to have sort of what we call the perfect contract?
Okay, thanks. First, mindset issue. All right. I've spoken to many freelancers over the years, and I typically ask them, "Where's your contract?" And they say, "No contract." Cannot, okay? An oral contract is recognized in law, but typically it puts you in a weak position because in a dispute, it's going to be a he said, she said kind of thing, and it's not going to get you very far. Another aspect is even if there is a written contract, a lot of the freelancers feel that they are at a disadvantage because they don't have the bargaining power. And again, I want to shoot that, dispel that once and for all. In Singapore, we're lucky to have something called the tripartite standards. Now, this is a movement whereby they try to encourage companies to adopt progressive work practices. And some of their initiatives directly relate to freelancers. So there is now a standard for contracting with the self-employed. There's even a certain standard that deals with the media freelancers. Perhaps Patrick can share more of that later, but what does your perfect contract look like? First, it should be in writing. What should it cover? Who are you contracting with? If you're contracting with party A, then it has to be party A. Who is the person in charge? Who are you dealing with? That person in charge should be the person either signing off on the contract or being the person that contract provides will be giving you the instructions. Second, what is your work scope? What are you contracted to do? I've heard so many stories of freelancers that say they were supposed to design A, then along the way, the person they are contracting with changed his mind. It became design B, and before you know, they had variations to it, so it was B plus one, B plus two, and all of this was for the same price, which was for design A. So all of this is not covered, but if you have a written contract that states clearly the scope, that will help you know what you have to do and what is a variation. And you can negotiate on that variation, which will invariably affect the price. So the third aspect then is the price. What are you being paid for this product that you are going to make? And just about pricing, many times a lot of the freelancers just price to get the job. They forget their costs, they forget the disbursements, they forget the value of their own time. They are just so fixated in getting the job because they say, if I charge more, I won't get the job. I think this is going to be a bit of a mindset thing where you need to come to terms with the value of what you're doing, but it has to be reflected in the written contract in terms of your pricing that takes into account your costs plus the profit and the time that you're expecting to gain out of this engagement. We talked about intellectual property earlier. You're developing something of value. Who is going to have the rights to that at the end of the day? Are you going to retain rights? Intellectual property should be built in there. Then, of course, you want to have a clause that gives you the right to vary the contract. And this clause is more powerful than you realize. So in a COVID situation, for example, you may not have a force majeure clause, may not be a frustrating event, but because you have this clause that says both parties can talk about how they're going to vary this contract, that may be the very basis which helps parties negotiate and find a solution that is going to be win-win so that they can weather this storm and they can also preserve the relationships for the future. So as a minimum, I would expect to see a contract in writing with these ingredients. Yeah.
Thank you. That was very helpful.
Yeah. Maybe I'll just jump in here. Actually, I vividly recall the very first, we have this LawWorks partnership between the labor movement and the Law Society. Then now the Law Society Pro Bono Services Office is almost like since 7 to 8 years that we had this partnership. The very first pocket series we came out with was on specifically, the rights of freelancers. So that small pocket series is still available. You can download it off the Law Society Pro Bono Services Office's website. It's quite useful. It provides a checklist on things to look out for, some of the points that Francis just mentioned, and of course the arts community came out with the Advocates for the Arts as well. Very, very handy guide, just not too long ago. Very useful. I still have my copy here, and always a joy to read it. because many of my friends from the arts community have, and including the legal fraternity, have put a lot of heart, mind, and soul, and time and energies into it. But as what Francis alluded to earlier, I think because of this growth of the self-employed space and a lot of lobbying, and of course the various groups that we have come together to make our voices get heard, the tripartite partners. Traditionally, it's always the government, the employers, the unions, and workers. But the tripartite partners have actually come up with a tripartite standards. It started off with tripartite standards on grievance handling, on hiring older workers, flexible work arrangements. But it has introduced in the last couple of years 2 standards specifically addressing the needs and the issues of freelance and self-employed workers and persons. So the first one is what we call the contracting with self-employed persons. It's a very useful tripartite standards, and it binds the public sector. So if you're contracting with the public sector, make sure that they are in compliance. So if not, report them. And it sets out some key terms of engagement, not employment, but engagement. Quite a number of them, which Francis alluded to earlier on, this so-called perfect contract or the key employment terms. And the other one is, besides this tripartite standards on contracting with self-employed persons, is actually one specifically for media freelancers. It's called the tripartite standards on procurement of services from media freelancers. And it encompasses things like, you must have a written contract, payment schedules, timely payment, insurance as well. Because we know many of our freelancers in this sector do not, buy work injury compensation or WICA, so to speak, kind of work injury insurance, and as well as dispute resolution, something which we've been talking about. So it's available on the net, the 2 standards. To give you the web page is www.tal, it's Tripartite Alliance for short, .sg. So it's www.tal.sg. You can download many of the templates that have been inbuilt, some of the forms, some of the sample clauses. I wouldn't say very, very comprehensive, but basically things to look out for, and will put you in good stead, especially if you are starting from ground zero.
Let me just jump in quickly here. For freelancers listening in, this is how you can use developments like this to your advantage. When you're having this conversation with a party you're going to work for, ask them, have you heard about the tripartite standards? Do you subscribe to it? If they say never heard of it, then maybe this is not a party that you want to work with. All right. If they say, yes, we've heard of it, we subscribe to it, then that's your opening to talk about your perfect contract. So learn how to use these developments in the marketplace to your advantage.
I have about five
suggestion.
Yeah, I have about 5 minutes left for my Q&A session. But I have a very good question from the webinar attendees asking about what happens if the freelancers ensure that all these contract terms are set out in written form, but the service buyers still don't adhere to such terms. What do you think can be done in the long run with respect to such a problem?
Yeah, maybe I chime in on this, and Francis can give the legal perspective. But otherwise, I think what we have tried to do, besides the 2 sets of tripartite standards, is to have sort of an industry practice and standards. That's why I alluded to the point on getting everyone together, banding together, the unity of is strength kind of like statement, that if everyone in that particular sector comes together and adopt sort of like a professional practice or customer usage or some industry practice and baselines and proxies, I think that will help a great deal, because sometimes I hear a lot of grievances from freelancers that sometimes they are at the mercy of the buyer of services, because some of these buyers of services are big corporations or they have deep pockets, and they want you to swear all your rights away, and they want to have everything that you know, and then changing goalposts day after day and stuff like that. So I think important is that, and of course, negotiating and trying to get it as cheap and as cheaply as possible. So I think it's important that from a practical point of view, if the industry or the profession or the craft can band together, not anti-competitive, but more of setting some baseline so that we don't see cheap sourcing, so to speak, happening. Yeah.
Mm. What about
Let
a
me jump in
legal point
here.
of view?
Okay, I think to quickly dispel any misconception, just having a contract doesn't mean there will be no more disputes. Disputes stem from human nature. Human nature, people try to take advantage, get the best deal. But by having a written contract, you actually level the playing field. And again, maybe let me give you a practical tip. If you had no written contract, nothing in black and white, then what Patrick says is going to be your reality. It will be a nightmare because you feel disadvantaged, taken advantage of. With a written contract, at least there is a roadmap. There is a standard as to what is expected. And as a business owner, being self employed, you owe it to yourself to monitor this contract. And if you see, for example, your buyer of your services changing the scope, trying to ask for freebies, this is where you should begin that discussion. Another misconception, it doesn't mean that you just have to wait for a dispute and then fight in court. With mediation and negotiation gaining traction as dispute resolution mechanisms, this can happen at any time in the course of your relationship. So, in the example of a work scope changing, have your conversation with your other party. And if you can't reach an agreement, invite them. Let's go for mediation, whether it's at TADM or whether it's through the mediation centers or whether it's through the Law Society mediation scheme. There's so many options for you. But the important thing is monitor your contract and have that conversation. Don't wait until the dispute gets out of hand.
Hmm. That's a useful reminder actually for all. I have a question about the COVID-19 Act, and some para-educators have written in. They were saying that because of the COVID-19 situation, some of the programs that they were engaged to run were cancelled, right? They have lost their income, no idea when the work will resume, but they are wondering how then should they either invoke the COVID-19 Temporary Measures Act law, or should they question MOE about the decisions that have been made? What would you suggest for these para-educators that we have attending our webinar today?
Okay, my suggestion is all of the above. Okay,
Mm,
this is an example of where in the situation you're facing, you should explore all avenues. So if you have a industry community that you're able to tap on that. As far as the COVID-19 Temporary Measures Act is concerned, put in your check on the eligibility criteria. No harm checking it out, and have the conversation with the other party as well, reaching out to them and say, okay, we understand it's been cancelled. Would you want to change this to an online program? Would you want to convert this into something that can be run later in the year? We can still do this program for you. It's just at a later date and maybe with some upgrade in content. All right, but
mm,
have that conversation, explore. And if nothing else, this COVID-19 Temporary Measures Act, the sentiment behind it is we need to find creative solutions together. Let's put a moratorium on any actions. Let's find creative ways together.
mm. Patrick, anything to add about dealing with institutions?
Yes, so I totally agree with what Francis just shared. I think explore, because some of our professions or groups may not have access to some of these associations that we have formed, and they have not band together. So I think it's important to air it and to because we don't know what we don't know. Because I think there are a lot of unique circumstances and situations and scenarios that are happening literally on the fly. So I think if
Mm,
you do face any hardship in any way, I mean, do engage the relevant agencies, or if in this case it's a Ministry of Education, do engage them. I think that the school, I think generally, my sense is in dealing with the public sector, we try to be as compassionate as possible. We try to support and try to creatively work around the problem where possible. As you can see from the recent sports coaches announcement not too long ago, just yesterday, by MOE. So I'm sure that when we envisage or we encounter some of these scenarios, we will try our very best to engage the relevant agencies. For private, if we are not, if the other party is not a public sector agency, then probably some of the other recourses like what Francis alluded to, maybe the better way to go about it.
Patrick, let me jump in here. I might be putting you on the line here. But this is an example of how freelancers can band together. You see, in good times, probably if you're belonging as a freelancer, you're one of those that doesn't is in a space where your various freelance practitioners have not banded together. But now COVID-19 has hit, and all of you are finding yourselves in a crisis. This might be a great time for you all to get on a chat, band together, either on LinkedIn, WeChat, or WhatsApp. Start a community, start a conversation, and Patrick, this is where I was saying I'm putting you on the line. You now know how to reach out to Patrick.
Yes.
With this community that you've gathered together, reach out to Patrick and see how perhaps he can guide you to build this community into a more coherent and cohesive whole. And who knows, out of COVID, great things may have happened for this freelance community. So Patrick, I hope I haven't put you in too much of a spot.
No problem. All my lines are public anyway. So I think all three of us are on LinkedIn. I'm also on Facebook, and really, we actually, besides, in particular, if you're talking about education sector, we actually have an education services union looking after the needs of adult educators, etc. I mean, I'm not too sure whether some of our adult educators, or in this case, not adult educators, but service providers or education education providers, we have not touch base with many of these. So that may be one possibility, linking up with our education services union and forming sort of like a chapter to look after this affected group. So we are definitely open to it, and connect with myself on LinkedIn or Facebook.
Actually, there are many resources out there as well. I see a lot of questions about some specific legal situations, but unfortunately, we are nearing the end of the webinar. The Law Pro Bono Society Services Office does provide online legal clinics as well. They used to be at each of the district, and people can sign up for them, but now because of COVID-19 is online. Please feel free to write into them if you have any contractual disputes and you require just a short consultation. The consultation is free, and there are pro bono lawyers coming in every week to help attend to the queries as well. Yeah. And thank you, Patrick and Francis, for the very informative session. We have crossed the 1 hour mark. I have to bring the Q&A session to a close. But maybe I should inform the attendees there's still some time for you to download the resources if you haven't done so. Like we talked about the SIRS program, we talked about the training fund, the UCare fund, the handouts are available. Please download them. We talked about the various mechanisms for dispute resolution. There's also a handout on that with the relevant links. Please download and use. I should also plug in something which is a passion close to my heart. The Law Society Pro Bono Services Office does run something that's new called the Advocates for Arts Legal Clinics. If you're an arts practitioner or in the arts field and you require legal advice, you can write into them through inquiry at lawsocprobono.org. They will set you up with an appointment. Actually, I got quite a few requests this afternoon as well. There will be pro bono lawyers coming in to help you and spend about 30 minutes with you to explain your issues, your concerns. All right, so there are many resources out there, and I think what has really stuck with me are two things, maybe if I can summarize. One is that really the freelancers are not alone. You
Mm,
can band together, you can start maybe promoting good practices together as well in times of this COVID-19 situation. And two, really, this is a situation where I think we must band together to communicate. Everyone's in this. If there are problems arising, I think running to the courts may not be the first solution that we should be looking at. There are agencies out there. If an organization has been difficult with the freelancers, then there are, for example, TADM mechanisms. There are various places where we can try and seek legal advice and see if there can be any assistance provided to us. Right?
mm.
Any last words, Patrick and Francis?
Patrick, you first.
Yes, I think important that to realize that there are various help schemes and support measures available. So slowly navigate them and leverage on whatever that's provided and we'll watch this space very very closely for sure.
On my part, I know the law can be confusing sometimes, and especially when the crisis or problems hit. Uh, the first reaction is, to fight, but I think you should be now looking at negotiating, mediation if need be, working it out with the other party. And that will require everything about you as a freelancer, belief in yourself, belief in what you're doing. But at the end of the day, I think we are going to build a vibrant freelance professional and community, and we look forward to that.
Thank you, Francis and Patrick.
Thank
It's
you.
been a very informative 1 hour. For the webinar's attendees, I hope you have found the webinar useful. After you leave today's webinar, you will receive a survey, and we will appreciate your feedback on today's session. Thank you for attending our webinar tonight, and really have a good evening. And I look forward to seeing some of the attendees, or some of you attending the next webinar with the Law Society. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a great
Yeah.
evening.
Thanks,
Stay safe.
everyone. Good night.